Hi, my name is Chris Namsu. I'm the Planning Director for the City of Wilsonville, Oregon. And I'm going to speak a little bit today about some of my recent experiences with low impact development, rainwater management, and green infrastructure. I have a degree in natural resources planning from Humboldt State University, and I've had the benefit of working in this wonderful city of Wilsonville for the past 20 years of my life, and I've learned a tremendous amount about this particular topic. I've got a map on my left here that is a city of Wilsonville aerial photo from 1980. It's interesting from a number of standpoints. Wilsonville has the Willamette River running through its southern portion. You'll see the large district of Charbonneau in the south, and a lot of development occurring up on the northern portions of the city around the exit 286 off of Interstate 5, the Stafford Road, Ellickson Road interchange. As I thought about the development patterns that occurred back in the 1980s, stormwater management was historically looked at as kind of a pain from a development standpoint, and the objective was to always move the stormwater right off the site as quickly as possible. And so we've got this evolution of green infrastructure as it relates to those traditional gray infrastructure methods that were used historically. Up in Commerce Circle, we've got areas that were developed with large surface parking lots. There were a lot of trucking facilities in the area, and many of those trucking facilities, those large parking lots, actually serve as the detention for large stormwater events. So when the rain gets significant, we can go up there and we can see large areas of paved surface that become inundated with stormwater management. And that's a practice that you'd no longer be able to do today. And we'll talk a little bit as I go forward about some of the evolution and how we manage and some of the new tools that we use to manage rainwater today in the 21st century. Some other things that happened back in the 1980s that you wouldn't be able to do involve what is called an out-of-basin transfer. We have development that occurred in the large Tektronix campus and ultimately the Mentor Graphics campus in the center of the city. These are large high-tech corporate headquarters where they literally transferred the rainwater, the stormwater, out of the watershed basin into another basin. Beckman Creek is a significant riparian corridor that in a civil engineering's way of thinking, had ample capacity to manage stormwater. And the way that the normal watershed drained was to the west, and it was a much shallower drainage basin. So these large campuses had a lot of rainwater, and back in the 80s they would be permitted to actually transfer that rainwater out of the watershed where the development was located into another watershed. And over time that can cause a lot of disruption, different kinds of head cutting in the stream corridors. It can cause erosion and different undesirable effects from transferring that rainwater to a canyon or a riparian area that wasn't previously receiving those runoff, that runoff. Another thing that's evolved significantly since the 1980s involves how we manage the release of stormwater into the natural areas. Historically, back in the 80s and even through the 90s, the outfall structures themselves would often be designed and located at the top of the riparian canyon. And then it would just sheet flow or have actually more of a point source and flow down the canyon. And this past year, the city of Wilsonville has spent several $1 million repairing areas that were previously damaged by stormwater runoff. And so the erosion that's occurred in those canyons needs to be more thoughtfully addressed. It needs a green infrastructure approach and design, and it will reduce the potential for erosion over time. So what we do now is we often slow the water down in a series of pools. We bring that point source of release down lower into the canyon, closer down to the edge of the water so that it doesn't travel over land as much and become an erosion problem. So when we move to the 2013 map of the city, we can see how much the city's changed and developed. And over the last 10 to 15 years, the green infrastructure has really gained a tremendous amount of momentum from an integration standpoint. It's much more of a site-specific level way to manage the runoff and the rainwater. And it's really an integration of four very significant professions. It's an integration of traditional civil engineering practices with landscape architecture and their attention to design and plant material. And it also integrates the planning profession from a landscape and development standpoint, and also folding in urban forestry and the tree canopy and the valuable role that the forest and natural and trees and the urban forest plays in stormwater management community-wide. So Wilsonville is a rapidly growing community. We have now over 20,000 people in the community, and we've been working on relatively large-scale urban areas, such as the Villebois planning area, which is a 500-acre master plan community that now it's planned for 2,600 dwelling units at build-out, and we're currently about halfway through the project. That project was integrated with rainwater management in mind. It's got a toolbox of rainwater management practices that you will find integrated into the fabric of the community. It's got bioswales, green streets, pervious pavers, parks that act as dual detention facilities in the winter, and then recreation areas in the summer. And the city's capital improvement program and our public works standards, which were recently completely rewritten, now wholly integrate low impact development alternatives into the public projects that we develop as a city. So as you go around the city, you will see the city constructing new road connections, and all of those new roads are integrating green infrastructure and low impact development practices into the fabric of the community. So Villebois is somewhat of a model of integration of low impact development and urban forestry and integrating trees into the fabric of the development. And it's a neat project, and I'd encourage you all to go learn a little bit more about it, or actually to visit the site. If I came over to the last board, we have a new urban area that we're planning, and it's out on the city's east side. It actually goes off the map at this location. It's about 500 acres as well, and it's called the Frog Pond area. And the Frog Pond area, we're working on a concept plan for that area. And the concept planning board that I have in front of you here depicts a number of those low impact development alternatives that you would have. Green Street with a filter strip. The filter strip is often a tool that's used on the edge of a parking area where you have a sheet flow from a large paved surface that then enters the filter strip, and it continues to sheet flow, and it usually ends up in some sort of a natural landscape. There's green roofs. We haven't integrated green roofs in a complete way in Villebois yet, but we do have several picnic shelters, some small-scale recreational areas that integrate landscape, and they're usually a sedum or a small succulent plant that is planted, and that reduces the runoff from the pervious surface that is the roof. Parking lot rain gardens. Here at City Hall, we've got a great example of some parking lot rain gardens. The parking surfaces on both sides sheet flow again into a series of swales, and those swales are checked. These bioretention cells are checked, and then the water, when it rises up, is allowed to settle the pollutants. It gets cleansed, and it flows from one end of the swale to the other. A stormwater planter is a type of low-impact development tool that is utilized in more constrained environments. You'll find rainwater planters located in your kind of retrofits in more of your central city environments, and they are built to handle a little bit more capacity. That's why you have the depth. They're typically a constructed concrete box, and they give you a little bit more volume than your stormwater your stormwater planter does, which is more of a linear type of a series of landscape features, usually adjacent to a street or in a parking lot. So here's a couple of examples of stormwater bioswales with the curb cut that allows the street runoff to enter, and then it traverses across the planted material, is cleansed before entering a piped system, and often going to a larger detention basin before being released back into the natural environment. And then my favorite of all, street trees, the important role that landscape architecture plays in urban forestry, always choosing the right tree in the right place. Our canopy is wonderful from an energy conservation standpoint, and beautifully tree-lined streets and incorporation of trees appropriately into low-impact development and green infrastructure is a really important and exciting part of the entire profession. I love this area of my job because it's rapidly evolving. It's very exciting. It's changing all the time, and it's an exciting thing to implement on the ground, and I'd encourage you all to learn as much as you can about green infrastructure. Thank you.